Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate.
Hello.
And we are joined by Ben Wheeler of Pinkerton's Ghosts.
That's
Uh,
right.
and if you'd like to, tell everyone about that for a minute, I guess.
Pinkerton's Ghost is a horror anthology podcast written by me, edited, and so on, as well as two of my friends, Anthony Marchetta of the God Robot fame, and Ken Dickinson, who's a voice actor whose probably most famous work is a equation of infinite complexity, as well as John C. Wright's book of Feasts and Seasons. Both are well worth listening to. It follows three detectives who are saving the world against supernatural evils, who are certainly not metaphors for our current situation. Absolutely not.
Okay. And
This video gets cited a lot whenever kids have to write book reports about it later.
Oh, absolutely. And, why I was executed at the Hog. But we'll get to that. That's a life goal right there.
Right.
And we are getting together tonight to talk about G.K. Chesterton's poem, The English Graves. So before we get to that, usual reminder, if you like my work, if you would like to support me, you can go to subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great. And you can sign up there as a supporter. Also, wherever you happen to be watching this, it is on at least two other platforms. And so my videos are on YouTube, BitChute, and Odyssey until YouTube decides to kick me off, which I'm sure is going to come at some point. And Pinkerton's Ghost is also on YouTube and unauthorized.tv. Anywhere else?
Yes, we staggered it out. Unauthorized is, as ever, a beautiful, glorious work in progress. So don't freak out if you don't see as many episodes on there as you will on YouTube or on iTunes and Spotify, which are only the audio episodes under Pinkerton's Ghosts. We are part of the Superversive SF YouTube channel, which I'm hoping will bring in a couple more people soon.
Okay, so having said that, Ben has volunteered to read for us The English Graves in his sonorous podcaster voice. So I am going to put that up on the screen for everybody. And okay. Sorry. I'm going to put that up on the screen for everybody, and we will go ahead and read that. Let me know when you guys see it.
Well, we do.
Okay. Then go ahead.
Were that I, wandering citizen whose city is the world, I would not weep for all that fell before the flags were furled. I would not let one murmur mar the trumpets volleying forth how God grew weary of the kings and the cold hell in the north. But we whose hearts are homing birds have heavier thoughts of home, though the great eagles burn with gold on Paris or on Rome, who stand beside our dead and stare like seers at an eclipse, at the riddle of the island tale and the twilight of the ships. For these were simple men that loved with hands and feet and eyes, whose souls were humbled to the hills and narrowed to the skies, the 100 little lands within one little land that lie, where Severn seeks the sunset isles, or Sussex scales the sky. And what is theirs, though banner blow on Warsaw rise again, or ancient laughter walks in gold through the vineyards of Lorraine? Their dead are marked on English stones, their loves on English trees. How little is the prize they win, how mean a coin for these. How small a shriveled laurel leaf lies, crumpled here and curled. They died to save their country, and they only saved the world.
Okay. So, Nate, would you like to get us started?
On a serious note, the end of the poem seems very downbeat. Like does he believe that England was destroyed in the course of this conflict? That it was irrevocably damaged, and that its destiny upset, or that it met its or that it was struck a mortal wound, and that it's only downhill from here? It's kind of strange. They went to save their country, but only save the world. Or is he trying to make it like, hey, they just want to do this one thing, but what they actually did was much greater? It feels a little ambiguous to me.
Well, it's he didn't say they died to save their country and their country was ruined. He didn't say that. He said they died to save their country and they only saved the world.
True. But I don't know. I still find it ambiguous.
Well, okay,
Because,
I can...
I feel like if he wanted to say they saved both, it would be like, they died to save their country and in doing saved the world. But it seems like the way he chose to word it excludes both options.
So there's another way to look at it. Does he mean the world and the sense of people and the things within it? Or does he mean the world as in the world power, which as a Catholic he would be aware of?
Question.
So if this is he referring to World War I, by the way? I don't know when this was published.
Okay, so yeah, this was published, the book this is in was published in 1922. So it seems quite likely he was talking about what we now know was World War I.
That is a terrible bit of irony then.
And it's
because I didn't say anything.
Yeah, well, and it's actually kind of okay. First off, I guess I'll have to rewind and say what I think he's saying with that last line, which is why I chose this poem. They died to save their country, and they only saved the world. And they went off to fight for England, but if England had stayed out of it, it wouldn't have hurt England at all. Like, it wasn't a fight England needed. Like, if England had just said, y'all do your thing, it wasn't their problem. And they could have stayed out of it. And, they didn't have, like, if they hadn't been fighting, it wouldn't have been a problem for England. And it's like, what is it? So let me find the line. And what is theirs, though banners blow on Warsaw risen again, or ancient laughter walks in gold through the vineyards of Lorraine? Like, what are they getting out of this? Oh, Poland is free. Good for Poland. Oh, France has Lorraine back. Good for France. Why is England in this? Why did hundreds of thousands of our young men get killed? Oh, we saved the world. Is that what you told them? Is that what you told them when you're going off? Did you tell them you're fighting for the world? No, you told them they were fighting for their country.
Yeah, World War I still remains the tragedy that is entirely too complex to talk about in a single sitting, and even creates immense distress. Like it tore the heart out of Europe. And it destroyed something that, quite frankly, hasn't been rekindled, has only gotten worse. Honestly, the Englishman is one of the most weak and spineless creatures in all of Europe. And it's unfortunate. It is a true tragedy. May God deliver them, but he doesn't seem to be doing it right now.
Well, he has delivered them the hard times that can hopefully start making strong.
I hope so.
I mean, it's the thing. The thing with that saying is, like, hard times make strong men. Well, kind of. They also make dead men. And so it's kind of a choice. So which one you end up as. But like, yeah, I really like this poem because okay. For one thing, if we're looking at England in World War I and looking at America today, like in terms of scale, like America's wars in the past 20 years, in terms of scale, it's not remotely comparable. Like what happened to England is worse by several orders of magnitude. But in term, what's that?
Yeah, agreeing with you.
Yeah, rumbles of agreement.
But in terms of like, why are we doing this? In terms of like, oh, go fight for your country. What does my country care about Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria? Why are we doing this? Oh, you're going to go, save America. America's just fine. America was just fine. We only saved the world.
We would be fighting in a different desert if it was all about saving America.
Yeah, the troops could be deployed in a more southerly direction than east, and perhaps closer at hand.
I mean, they'd be retracing the paths of some of their long lost predecessors.
But
Mexico for all of you historically illiterate people.
Well, if they're watching this video at this point, they probably have some degree of historical awareness. Well, I guess unless they're just in it for the literature.
You never know. Somebody might have stumbled in from a Seth Meyers video or something.
Not with the way YouTube does recommendations these days. Once upon a time, that could have happened. Anyway, but Ben, you haven't said. I haven't really given you your say yet. So what are your first thoughts on this one?
It is a dirge. It is a mournful retelling of the dead, concerning the dead that were brought home by World War I. Now that I have confirmation that it is World War I and not some other conflict, but also it is describing the tragedy in poetic terms. The tragedy is that whatever they did, it doesn't matter. They're still eagles over Rome. I know that Mussolini was starting to do his thing around this time. I know that, the communist movements were starting in Germany around this time, the communist movement is the direct cause of a certain failed art student. There's a whole bunch of other things that whatever the old order was, it has died. God had a hand in it. God allowed it. And it makes way for other things, but the tragedy is at hand. The tragedy is the fields of English graves.
Well, and the other thing with that, he starts off, it starts off, were I that wandering citizen whose city is the world, I would not weep for all that fell. Like, if you consider yourself a global citizen, if you consider yourself a citizen of the world, why, in his case, he would be talking about Englishmen. In our case, we'd be talking about Americans, but why would you particularly care if a bunch of American soldiers died? You're a citizen of the world. You have no particular attachment to this bit of land here, like those soldiers do, like he talks about, like,
They are the land now.
I wouldn't say American in this case. I would keep it to the English, because this is an English-souled poem. Like, there's certain things which I can say are very American. John Brown's body on a apple tree. It took me a second. I'm sorry, but it should be seen as sort of an issue of national identity and race, the quote unquote English race.
Well, that was. I don't know if at the time. I know that was I don't know if in Chesterton's day they would have used that phrase, but they did talk about the different nations as the English race, the German race, whereas today we think of race as more a including a larger scale with those as subsets. But anyway, yeah, I mean, this is his poem is out of love for England. At the same time, as an American, I can look and I can see the same thing he's talking about, with my country and my people.
Oh yeah.
And
because we're those who, as he so beautifully says, our hearts are homing pigeons. It always heads back to where it always heads back to where we were. And I said, I don't know. There are going to be people out there that say that that's a stupid thing. That borders are imaginary lines, and who cares what dirt you grew up playing, running across.
They're men without chests.
Yeah, exactly that.
That was
it's one of the levels of anchoring that helps you to become a thoughtful, philosophical person. If you're a damn tumbleweed just sort of blowing around, then yeah, you can just be frivolous about that. But if there's a place that actually anchors you, and once you grow roots, you think different. You worry about how things are going to affect things. It's just like, to a lesser extent, but in the same sort of vein, it's like having a family. It's sort of like the next sprout of branches out of that sort of thing. And me and Zach Log have discussed that numerous times in other videos, how it changes your thinking to have that kind of attachment.
Well, and it's this also reminds me, especially the middle part of this poem reminds me a little bit of another poem Nate and I talked about, which is Sir Walter Scott from The Lay of the Last Minstrel. Breathes there the man with soul so dead, who never to himself had said, "This is my own, my native land." And okay, and Nate, I know I intend no offense to you talking about I know this is your country, this is your place, and I understand that this is your home. It's not mine. I'm not from here. I'm a transplant. And well, not but a couple of times since I've been down here, when I've visited, when I've headed back up north, it's actually not even, it's way before I get home. When I get into the Appalachians and there's these hills all around me, I don't know how else to describe it. I just start breathing a little easier. I'm just a little more relaxed. And
no, I get it.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, and it's kind of,
when I was stationed in Virginia, right? Especially in the summer, I'd always feel a little weird. And then I came down a trip back down here, and I knew I was home. And I was still, like I said, a couple hours out, but I knew I was home when I got out of the car, and the sunlight hit me so hard it stung. When I got out of the car, I was like, "Ow!" Yeah, that's what I've been missing.
And and there are things for those of you who have stayed in one place. By the way, this is not telling you not to do that, by the way, but just there are things you love about your home, about your hometown, about your area that you have no idea that you love because you've never been away from them. And you kind of have to be away for at least 6 months or a year before you realize what some of those things are. And so there's the people, like he's talking about in this poem, and there's in that middle stanza, there's this little patch of earth that is where you belong. And that's not a thing to neglect. That's not a thing to ignore or walk away from.
Absolutely. I know for myself, there's been a lot of questions about moving and stuff like that. But fundamentally, my family is in Missouri. I've got many generations of dead buried here.
Even the Indians the Mare Indians had a phrase where I think it was a sitting crazy horse, where he said, "My lands are where my dead lie buried." There's a spiritual nature to it too. I never feel better than when I'm sitting in Missouri soil. I say I like the looks of Virginia more, sometimes more than Missouri, but they have the same features of hills and rolling hills and mountains and forests as far as the eye can see, of a very rural area and community, a farm. Like it's nature filled and it's hilly, so it's not just some flat plain. What I'm describing a place that's like Missouri without being Missouri.
Yeah,
No,
and it's.
I like
Oh, go
places
ahead, Nate.
I like places where you cannot drive, 10 minutes in any direction without passing over some, sort of slow, dark water.
Yeah, that's
That's where I'm from. It's like if I ever needed to live off of nature, I'm going to do it by fishing, probably, because I know that anywhere within walking distance in any direction is a place where I'm going to be able to catch catfish, brim, whatever I need to eat. And it's been a feature of my life the whole time. And so, I go to places where I'm like, this water moves entirely too much. Or I go to other places like, where the water go? And it just, I never feel at ease. I'm like, I could starve here. This sucks.
But yeah, like I said, the reason I chose this poem is just that really painful irony in the last few lines, because these young men, and it's doubly ironic because there's actually another book that Chesterton wrote a few years before this, which is basically arguing for England's involvement in the war. And unless I misread this poem, maybe I have, I suspect he kind of came to regret arguing that case. I
mean, nobody could have known what that war was going to be because it was so unlike wars that preceded it. Just industrial scale butchery had not happened yet. And so once it finally came about, all these people are like, yeah, sound the drums, sound the trumpets, beat the drums, roll out the flags. Come, young men, let us go to war. After seeing what became of the young men and, hearing the trumpets and the drums drowned out by the roll of artillery and just the din of machine gun fire, suddenly war had turned less about a gallant pursuit of our bravery and valor and might. It just became, hey, who can sight their guns better? All the bravery in the world doesn't matter when Gustav, Franz, and Fritz can kill 500 of you before you cross 100 yards of ground.
Yep.
And so, like I said, it changed. I think this is where you really run into the changing perception of war from a glorious encounter and a thing that, elevates men to just horror.
Well, it's also okay. One thing, and I'm a little ambivalent about recommending this now, but Dan Carlin has an excellent series on World War I called Blueprint for Armageddon, and it's like the whole thing is it's a set of podcasts, and the whole thing is at least 8 or 10 hours. And so if you haven't heard his Hardcore History series, I recommend looking him up. Oh crud, what was the other thing? It is kind of fascinating to see because I remember thinking about this when I heard the story of the Red Baron, whose actual name I'm having trouble recalling right now.
Rick Tolson.
There you go. But like an ace pilot for Germany during World War One, and he ended up, he was basically their best fighter pilot, with no close competition, and shot down 80 Allied planes. And then he finally, like Jesus said, if you live, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And he finally met his end he was shot down, and he was shot down over enemy territory, and died. And like the people of, I don't know whether it was France, I don't know where it was, but like the people of the town near there, they gave him a hero's funeral to their enemy. And it's tough to articulate, but there's a strange kind of nobility, like in things like that you only see in times like war. Is it worth it? Probably not. I wouldn't, but like you can't.
Well, war between brothers. Like one of the things that people kind of miss about World War One, because they'll say, "Oh, the Ottomans participated." The Ottomans participated just because they were 5 minutes from Europe. Like people put a lot more into that than they really should. It was trying to stay relevant, and it was trying to get back at people who were going after it, like the English. It is entirely the simplest part of that war. But at the same time, this wasn't some sort of war between desperate powers of disparate religions and so on and so forth. This was a Christian brother war. These were Christians fighting Christians. Everyone involved would at least say that they're some sort of Christian. It doesn't matter whether you're part of the divide between Protestants and Catholics, so salvation and stuff like that. Every single participant would have, well, except for 0.1%, for all that matters, would have said that there's
diversity.
Right. Atheist diversity unite. They would have said that they were Christian. Like these were Christian people who were treating each other with chivalry, and it was the last time that happened in any of the wars that have happened since then, because they've all either been World War II, where that just doesn't happen as nearly as often as it should have, because most of the ground soldiers in that were Christian. And it didn't happen in any of the guerrilla campaigns against the communists, both because communists are godless and because the communists don't treat their enemies with any sort of respect.
Oh.
It is also
there are a lot of interesting moments where mercy and peace and humanity are extended in World War II.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's a massive industrial scale war. And so what you find, though, is interestingly where the forces of freedom are going, like, the British, American, and those are fighting against the Germans, is where you find those stories. On the Eastern Front, the sort of hardened elite core of the two evil empires butchered anyone and everyone they met. So it's sort of interesting that even if it's mostly one side extending the humanity, it comes around from the other side a little bit too.
I mean, it depends on whose propagandists you're listening to. Quite frankly, I don't believe that World War I was any sort of butcher and butcher thing, and even in World War II, it wasn't really a butcher and butcher thing, except with the communists. But that's because they sent their people in a meat grinder, 5 guns for 100 men, or whatever the numbers are. That seems generous.
what was but so like I said earlier, one of the reasons I picked this poem is kind of I feel a great sympathy, like looking at America, looking at what our government has done over the past 20 years, and it's like, to my embarrassment, I was in favor of invading Iraq in 2002.
How could you not be back then?
Now, in my defense,
the benefit of hindsight, no, I definitely wouldn't be, because we know now the intel was wrong.
Yeah, and in my defense, I was like 22. I didn't really know that much. One thing that I'm sorry if you're 22 and you're watching this, it's not your fault, but you just don't know that much. Okay, there's no way to avoid it. You might be extremely intelligent, but there's some things you only pick up by living for a while. I look young. I'm not as young as I look. Anyway,
I'm 34 and I still don't know much. I'm starting to get where Plato was coming from.
I'm 32 and I only know things about literature. Everything else is just shadows in the cave.
But
shadows.
One thing that frustrates me looking back to that time is the absolutely terrible arguments that were presented by Democrats and liberals against the war. Because I remember, like, people were like, "Oh, Saddam's a nice guy. Why are we bothering him?" And I'm like, no.
He writes romance literature.
He was a very, very bad person. Okay, the problem is
what he got.
Yeah, the problem is, and like, that argument is so awful. I'm like, were they even actually trying? Or were they really on the side of let's do war? And anyway, but the problem is, like, to actually get something better, we would have to do a full-scale takeover and colonial government.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as in, this is our place now, you're doing what we say, and we would have to do that very clearly, very firmly, for like 50 years at least, to get something better.
No, not 50 years, dude. I'm talking generations.
Yeah, at least 100.
We would have to be there for centuries.
Yeah, and I will say, like,
their culture is not set up for freedom. Their, the sort of shared beliefs and the sort of mores that, pervade over there, they don't want democracy. They don't want the type of government we have. Protestations to the contrary. They want, like, democracy for their group. They want their group to be able to make choices, but everybody else better just listen.
Yep. Saddam was just one more strongman in a long list of strongmen living, going back to the 4th millennia BC. He was nothing new, and honestly, we won't even be 5 years before we know who the next Saddam Hussein is. And there might be like 3 of them.
Yeah, and if someone back then had
killed them guys too, and now we're just waiting for the next head to pop up on this freaking cursed Hydra.
Yeah, and if someone back then had argued, like, yes, he's an awful guy, but we're not going to be able to get anything better without, a level of commitment that you are not willing to do. If someone had said that, I'd be like, that's something to think about.
You would have been labeled unpatriotic and silenced.
Well, there's that too. I can think.
I hate to say it, but yeah.
Does anyone know what Pat Buchanan was saying about this way back then? Because it seems like something he might have said. I don't know.
All I know is that there wasn't a single dissenting voice that was worth a darn, or couldn't have been argued as controlled opposition. That's what I grew up with. You know, like I was a kid when September 11th happened, and you know, I watched the news every night. You know, I watched things like the 700 Club. Oh, and it hurts these days. That's something I actually cringe at.
See,
But
honestly,
it was God's will.
Honestly, as time goes by, I'm appreciating Pat Robertson a little more.
Oh no.
I'm not saying I'm a fan. I'm just saying I he doesn't seem quite as crazy as he did you know.
Neither is and that's saying something.
You know, like he was saying, I remember him saying, you know, we should take out Hugo Chavez. and I'm like, dude, no, you can't say that. And then and now, like, you know, 15 years later, I'm like, you know, if we had,
well, you see, that's the thing. All right, to keep going on geopolitics and forget the poem. The thing is, yes, taking out Hugo Chavez would have saved untold misery for millions upon millions of people and saved thousands and thousands of lives. That's not our job. That is speaking, if I were the American government, take it all and put it right here on me, basically, that's not our job. Our job is not to go out there and kill the bad people simply because they're bad people. Our job is to make sure that America and the things America needs are dealt with properly. We need to make sure that America is strong and safe. We need to make sure that the things that help America stay strong and safe are also safe. If you're a bad man who has no bearing on us, why do we need to mess with you? You know, if you're, you know, some crackpot communist down in Latin America, that sucks. I mean, you're a little close to home, but just because you're the idiot down the street doesn't mean we need to, you know, drop a SWAT team on.
And besides that,
there's no reason we need to kill them.
Money. Consider the taxpayers. They've spent so much on him.
Look, I'm a big fan of a more isolationist stance where it's like, oh, hey, look, these two tribes of natives are slaughtering each other. That's sad. That's terrible. Maybe we can get some humanitarian aid in there, you know, once they're done with it all, but there's really no reason we need to be involved in that.
Well, and that actually,
to stop them from doing it, we're going to have to start killing a bunch of them. And so,
well, and that actually kind of is, you know, or to my interpretation, that is part of the point of the poem. You know, they died to save their country, and they only saved the world. And, like, you know, again, like, what's, you know, you sell them, you know, you're doing this for America. Well, what did America actually get out of this? And, like, you know, Venezuela, it would be much the same, although Venezuela is closer and theoretically could affect us more.
Not really. They can't project power to their neighbors, much less, you know, across the Gulf of Mexico or up the Pacific coast.
Refugees.
Yeah, there's a couple thousand miles of Mexico.
But
check out the pictures of the current refugees. A lot of them are not Hispanic.
And then you look at the pictures and you're like, where are these women? Where are these children? This is all young, like military age males. What?
Are we talking about America or Europe?
Oh. The migrant caravans from Central America.
So the ones coming into America are like that now?
They can be.
They've been like that. They're only women and children for the press, like for the photo op.
Gosh.
They'll take like 3 women and the, you know, like half a dozen kids and fill the camera with them. But then you look and everybody else is like, that dude's like probably 25. That guy is, you know, like none of these guys are old.
Nope.
None of these guys are even remotely children. These are grown, you know, grown young men. They're just coming this way. I'm like,
See, I knew that about a lot of the migrants in coming into Europe. I did not know that the same was true for our own share of that of the blessings of diversity.
The trick's so nice they use it twice.
Well, it's a bit like pyramids, right? You know, why does pyramids pop up in so many disparate places? Because it's a really good way to stack rocks and they don't fall down for a long time. Why do you act like it's all about women and children and then march a bunch of, shiftless, young men into a place? Because the media will eat it up. It's catnip. The media are pussy.
One of the things that really we need to be careful about is what are we fighting for? A lot of the times I'm talking to people and they will defend billionaires with government contracts who support the liberal causes hand over fist, who are destroying the very countries that they got rich out of. And it's like, dude, don't interfere with this. I'm like, I don't care what you are. You're supposed to be a Christian. Where's your discernment on this? How in the world can somebody destroy what they have, not be good stewards of it, not be good stewards of their workers, to the point where their workers are starting to commit suicide on property like they're the Chinese, and call it Christian or call it good? If these soldiers died for the world, it is not a good thing. Whatever heroism they had, whatever beauty they fought for, whatever beauty remains, honestly, if they fought for it, it's probably overrun with people who are not Parisians, who are not Romans. I've been to Paris. I've seen how it is. My parents have been there. I've had a sister who's gone to Rome, not in the Catholic way. But it's again, going back to this poem, it's a tragedy. It is a mournful dirge. It is a threnody. It is a conrack. It is something to mourn the passing of heroic men who would have stood in the gap and said no. One of the things that we rebuild since World War I is that heroic spirit. Part of it is in art. This is more of an artist section of the world. But when I write Pinkerton's Ghosts, I say, what is the heroic method for this? Jack Morrow will die before somebody says the sun's not rising tomorrow and, has the magical apparatus to make it happen. If we can't promote this heroism, but smart heroism that says, I will not defend a billionaire who lives in the Swiss Alps and probably rapes children as his pastime, it's the heart of it. It's the soul of it. They died for the world. It was a tragedy, and he realizes that.
No man ever fought to save the world.
Yep.
Every man who has ever fought, at least, aside from mercenaries, I guess, but even them probably to some extent, every man who has gone out to fight for his country has gone out to fight for, mom, little brother, and apple pie, right? They go out to fight for something that is dear to them. You didn't say, hey, these philosophies are bad and we're going to end up, having all this trouble. Theoretically, and it's just a problem. Or, hey, we want more stuff. You always fight for, even godless heathen soldiers like the commies were fighting on behalf of the revolution. Yep. They were fighting to try and bring the world closer to this utopia that they envisioned. But
no man ever said, thank God I'm dying.
Colored glasses. Or they were, well, I'm sorry. A lot of them were also fighting to not get shot in the back of the head.
True.
But, that's another very personal motivation. But, the true believers, right? To spread their godless visions, they thought it was the best way forward. And then they made a bunch of other people suffer. But nobody ever fought to save the world. And so he's right. These men that died, and all you can say is that they saved the world. That's very sad. And that brings me right back to my original point. I feel like, this is a task failed successfully sort of statement. They wanted to save England. England needs saving.
Yep.
And honestly, they didn't save the world either, but there's no way in 1922 anyone could have known that. All World War One and its conclusion did was put a generation pause in the war.
Because they didn't have any more young men to kill. Oh, hey, we got to wait 20 years so we'll have another set of young men to kill.
Yeah.
No man ever said dying in a ditch, oh, thank goodness the Rothschilds can make another million.
Fair.
You know, one thing interesting, I hadn't thought about this until just now in this conversation. It is a little interesting looking at, like, movies, over the past, 10 or 20, 20 years or so. Like, nobody, like, the big movies, people aren't ever fighting for their home or for this little patch of Earth. They're fighting to save the world. And, like, that's the story we're sold. But, like all of us have been saying, like, nobody loves the world. Okay, God loves the world. None of us do, because none of us have been there. I've been to this place. I've been to that place. I love, my home, my hometown. I kind of like where I am now because I like a lot of the people around here. But, like, and I now have family here, and this is where my sons consider home, and that would be something to fight. But it's what is the I think it's in 1 John. He says, how can you love God whom you have not seen if you do not love your neighbor whom you have seen? And how can you love the world when you don't love your own town, don't love these people around you, these people and this little patch of earth that you've actually experienced? If you don't love that, you damn well don't love the whole world.
Yep.
And I've run out of steam, so.
And it's something that's kind of.
Go ahead.
It's something that I've been sort of discovering and discussing with people. There's a question of, like, how can one love what the world calls unlovable? Or why in the world is wanting something that I will not mention here for fear of getting Zacklog banned, without being evil? Don't you know XYZ believe the same thing? How dare you think that as well? And there's a whole bunch of things to it, like, the world doesn't want there to be a Christian people, a Christian ideal, and Christian children. The biggest coups have all been slow burn, civilization, society destroying things, and because of it, they've caught it's what we have to face. When we're looking down upon the graves of our ancestors, who, even with a little bit of a sneer, we can say, did you really understand what you were fighting for? Did you fight for the right side? I am inheriting these tragedies. I am inheriting this fight. If you fought for this, why must I fight for this too? And the answer is no, I'm not going to fight for it. I'm not going to fight to hold things. I'm going to rebuild stuff that should have been passed on to me. I listened to your inheritance video that's on the channel a little bit beforehand, Zacklog, and the big question is I'm not even just talking about the boomers. Like, whatever made them thought that the boomers would pass it on, and didn't pass on their religion, their ideals, like they should have. They tried. Honestly, more pastors back then knew the gospel than do now, even if we have more pastors. The chain has been broken, and the choices that were made were probably the best choices that they could make at the time.
But now we have to deal with that hindsight that said, I hate everything that this is coming to. I hate that I was deceived for so long. I hate that there's this and that weakness. I hate that there was never anything for it. There was a 4chan thread where this guy said, basically, listen, dudes, I dig it. It's tough. We have nothing. We have less than nothing. We're expected to like having nothing. And yet, we can be the most heroic generation ever just because we have so much to work through, so much to push through. There wasn't any porn back in the day like this. There wasn't any degeneracy back in the day like this. Weimar is barely topping us. If we can overcome it, we can be the heroes, and we don't have to stand over graves and say we fought for the wrong side.
Yeah, and it's a strange thing because in material terms, in material terms, like our country is pretty rich. But then even with that, there's this really weird divide, and like I don't know if either of you have seen these charts. Like you can see these charts of generational wealth, and you can see at our age, you know, when the baby boomers were 40, how much of the country's wealth did they hold? When Gen X was 40, how much of the country's wealth did they hold? And and you can look at this chart, and there's this just massive accumulation, you know, by this one generation, and they're still holding on to it. And so even though there is all this material wealth, it's kind of not passing on the way that has been normal. And then even besides that, even if we had the material wealth, like just this cultural destruction, you know, over the past century it's really difficult. It's really difficult to come to grips with. And it's like, you know, like the, you know, Rudyard Kipling poem that Nate and I covered like 2 years ago now, you know, lest we forget. And, you know, when I, you know, think of that poem, it hurts because like there's so much that has been lost, so much that has been forgotten or not passed on. And to be perfectly honest, I'm really worried sometimes about the kind of job I'm doing with that, because I am a parent and I don't think I'm doing nearly as well as I would like to with my own kids. In some ways, it's hard to know what I can do a lot better. But then, like, you know, if you look back, you know, the generation before us was really terrible at handing things on to us. And it's...
didn't have anything to give a lot of the time. They had been... The last few generations in our country have been increasingly set adrift just by, you know, the sort of pervading, we'll call it a culture. But, I mean, a lot of the foundational stuff that, you know, anchored and tethered and supported the generations going forward started to die off after, well, the boomers.
The boomers are still with us. They let it die.
Yeah. Like I said,
No pillow references.
But, I mean, just, there's been less and less given because people are like, no, we need to go toward the new thing, you know? Don't worry about the old thing. It's just, yeah, you know, we're more enlightened. And this sort of, you know, this sort of pseudo-enlightenment has discarded so much that is so valuable in pursuit of all this theoretical crap.
Yep.
I don't know. My desktop background is showing right here, and it's my family. It's my wife. It's my children. And I'm looking at them while we're talking. And all I can think of is that I want these boys, all 5 of them, to grow up with dirt under their nails, bruises on their shins and elbows, scraped up and grinning from ear to ear. I don't need them to sit there in front of screens. I don't need them to, wonder what it's like to wear a dress. I don't need them to try and figure out, am I a girl? I need them to know that they can be strong, they can be tough. I need them to know that they can be flawed and that God will forgive them. And that no matter what, Mom and Dad love them. And those are really the only things I need to teach. Those are the only lessons I really, really absolutely must pass on. And everything else is detail work. I'll teach them how to tie a fishing knot. I'll teach them how to ride a bike. Teach them how to throw a ball and catch it. I'll teach them how to split logs with an axe when they're old enough, because that is the single manliest thing you can do, apparently, at least from a testosterone standpoint. All of that stuff, fine, I'll get around to it. But right now, when they're little boys, I got to set in them strength, resilience, and faith. And they'll already be 90% of the way toward knowing everything they need to do. We'll work on math later.
And that's more than our ancestors did for us, our immediate ones anyway.
I gotta say, mine actually did a really good job. I hear about some things that people I was blessed. I grew up when I was born, my family were farmers, and farmers don't have time to stray too far from good sense and concrete tradition. So we did all right. I grew up. I tell people I've been in church since before I was born. I probably came out on the pew.
And I have a similar experience. The only reason I'm a Christian is because my dad actually lived the Christian life. And so many times I talk to atheists and they go, "Oh yeah, my parents were Catholic, but they only went Christmas and Easter, maybe." And it's like, of course you're, and it's like, well, what has God ever done to me? Of course you're an atheist. They never gave you anything about it. They never explained anything to you.
You had a building you knew well, not a God.
Right. Exactly.
No, I grew up, my family, my extended family, just the strength of generations was behind the forging of my faith. And I am forever more grateful. And I still have a lot of those people around to help me teach my kids. I am unbelievably blessed. I may not have a lot of the wealth of the world, but I've got a wealth of spiritual stability and just an unbelievable bounty of joy in my home.
Well,
you know what?
and
to get back to the poem, screw the world. That's what I would fight for. That's when my gun comes out. Is that, you know what? I don't care so much about the world. But my world is right here. And I'm not going to be lied to and tricked out of it. I'm not going to be pulled out by some far away thing. But by God, I'll fight for this. I'm coming to realize as I get older that the fight is here. We think our enemies are over there, some brown dude or some guy, some guy from behind the Iron Curtain. No. Our enemy's right here. Our enemy is on our shores, in our centers of power, and it's the people that are trying to tell us that who we are is wrong because we believe the things that have worked for all of human because we believe things that have been proven true over and over again, but because they hurt people's feelings, they can't be true anymore. You know what? No. We need to sit. We have to stand up to this kind of crap because it's this, this smug pseudo philosophy, this smug assurance that the march of time automatically means the march of progress. The newer thing must always be better. It's just wrong, and it's destroying. And so our enemy that we got to get ready to fight, for any of you who are feeling punchy, the enemy we have to fight is not yonder. It's here. It's looking down on us from great heights of power, not understanding that when the foundation abandons you, your great height of power suddenly turns into a plunging death trap. And no amount of computer meddling, no amount of, let's just say, creative paperwork can really stop it. I wrote an essay about it, and I'm thinking I might put it on my channel. My dear, poor, intermittent channel. And what I say is we have to be ready to basically ignore the destructive things that are going to try and be pressed down on us. So we have to just kind of listen to what they're saying, look at each other, shrug our shoulders, and keep walking away. And that if we can do that now in this generation, and just be like, you know what? The king is on his balcony, he's making his proclamation, and we're busy playing hacky sack because we don't care. If we can just keep living our lives, just peel our potatoes, push our cart, and ignore them, suddenly they don't have power. If we are unwilling to obey, they have no power over us.
Is it is that Irish democracy? Is that a name for?
That sounds about right, actually.
Do I have the phrase right?
I think so.
I've never heard the phrase before.
Basically, it's just like, oh, they passed that law. How nice for them. Not my problem.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure.
Just extreme, like not violent. No, like revolution. Just
100%
aggressive non-compliance.
Yeah. And if we can do that, we can break their power before it comes to the point where we actually have to shoot them.
The thing is that they care too much about us to let us do that.
The problem is there's not enough of them if we decide en masse to start.
People don't act like that.
That's true.
So the thing is that we can make all these different things, but the fact of the matter is that they'll come for the kids. They'll come for everything we have because we say we're Christian.
We're going to convert your children.
Exactly. They don't even hide it. They tell you exactly what they're going to do. The fact of the matter is that for men of action, we have to wait until the time is right. There is no reason to die like John Brown. There's no reason to be the martyr that isn't really a martyr, because dying for the world is not dying for Christ. We know who the enemies are. We cannot name the enemies due to legal concerns. We know what they're doing. We know who's on what CEO boards. If they cannot hide themselves, and Satan will not defend them when it comes time to say, you're not taking my kids. Not that I have children or anything like that. There's already many documents of people sharing books and stuff like that say how revolutions would take place. They're mostly modeled off of the moon as a harsh mistress, and if you've got a bad one, they'll think they're Ayn Rand too, which is always fun. And it takes all these different ideas, but the fundamental statement is that if Christ is our king, we still have to render to Caesar what is Caesar's, except that, unlike in Rome, we're not the property of the state. We are free men and we have rights, and they're guaranteed by God and by guns. To fight against them, we cannot fight against them until it's time to fight against them. If we ignore them, they'll still punish us because there's still people who will perform the law. I know police officers. I know military men. They care about their jobs. I know how judges think, especially in Missouri. Judges are absolute garbage. I know how these things work. Even if we keep to ourselves, even if we ignore it, even if there are some brave sheriffs in here or here and here in weirdly politicized positions that are just so weird how they keep it year after year despite being so unpopular and so attacked in the media, it doesn't matter until it's too late for anything else to happen, and may God have mercy on the souls of those who perish. But they're not dying for the world. Well, half of them are.
So,
I think it's going to be less than half.
I think I've said
want to pay. I don't want us to have to again pay in brass and blood for things I lose hope day by day that we're going to be able to avoid it, but I don't think there's a political remedy, and I don't think the philosophical remedy is is trying to use the systems in place. I think it's basically just, to the best you can, ignore it. And if we can all ignore it together, okay. Do I think they're going to let us? No. Do I think there are going to be people that are, totally chuffed and utterly thrilled to comply? Yes. Do I think there are people we can make there be enough mass in the non-compliance camp to, be too big to hit? Maybe. And I feel like it's worth a shot before we actually have to fire the shots.
Sure, but to comment on what you're saying and to rebut your arguments, I would have to say things that Zach Log would have to cut from this video.
That's fair.
So, but I'll say this: there are people who are slaves, and there are people who are masters of themselves. Christ gives us mastery over ourselves. It's one of our strongest strengths because we understand the freedom that he gives us. However, that's not the same for non-Christians, and it's not the same for other people. Like we said, the common status in the Iraq area is a dictator. It's the same thing for most people.
You have very good points, and I see where you're going with that.
So, I feel like I've said most of the things I wanted to say about the poem and branching off of the poem. Nate, any last...
I've said far more than I had to say initially, with the exception of one thing, which is, English graves. And I was like, depending on what side of the Atlantic they're on, this poem might be hilarious. But it turns out it was on the wrong side of the Atlantic to be hilarious. So,
Ben, any last thoughts for you on this one?
So, for the idea of it is that we have to consider what is the measure of Christ in anything that we're doing from now on, especially when it comes to the people we revere as heroes. One of the biggest statements I have taken into myself is this one. It's on, those vaporwave images I love. And it says, "All my heroes are dead. I must become one." Every Christian man listening to this has that duty. We cannot be less than heroes, or else our children will perish. And those who let their children perish are baby boomers. So, don't let that be your epithet on the grave, if you get me. It is a tragedy. My policy on these things is that there's no brother wars until the present crisis is past. I will not fight my Catholic brother. I will not fight my Orthodox brother, but I'll certainly fight Protestant brothers. But that's the normal state of things. It keeps us sharp, you see. But it's just remember that, if there's an internet argument or this coming up or that, if it's some idiot, ignore him. If it's your brother in Christ, hey, no brother wars. That's it. Check out Pinkerton's Ghost, please. Please, I beg
that
you,
too.
please.
I will, and I will. I will put a link in the show description to your channel as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for joining me tonight, and God be with you.
Thank you for having me.